got an oldie to work on today. This is a 1955 ES 225T. The T stands for thin, and this is in fact the first thin-line hollow body guitar that Gibson released. It's got some interesting features. I worked on one of these a few years ago. Didn't film any of it, I don't think. So I'm reasonably familiar with them, and that one had been modified in some fun ways. I made an airline style bridge, installed a different style of tailpiece, total refret, and then put in what I think was a Firebird pickup. It was a really slick guitar. I like that one. 1955 was in fact the first year of this model's production, so this is one of the early ones. As you can see, in some ways it's a bit of a modest guitar. Just got the one P90 in this slightly unusual but sonically interesting middle position. I'm not being facetious. They really do sound good with a pickup in the middle. And it's got this bridge. The combo bridge and tailpiece in one that was designed for the earliest gold top Les Pauls, which is kind of infamous because they got the neck angle wrong on those guitars in the first run, and it had to be understrung to be made playable. In other words, the strings wrapped around under the bridge, making palm muting tricky, and even then it was very difficult to set it up with decent action. Consequently, a lot of those early Les Pauls have been since retrofitted with stop tailpiece bridges. The bridge lasted less than 2 years like that, because Les couldn't play it, and I wonder maybe if its inclusion on these guitars was a means of just getting rid of the stockpile in the factory. They also put it on the ES 175 as well, which is, it's a deep hollow body, also with a gold top usually. Scotty Moore used it on the early Elvis sessions for Sun. The 225 model lasted for just about 4 years, and it was discontinued in 1959. A few of the later ones had floating bridges with the standard trapeze. This thing is in pretty nice shape, but it has had some work and some odd stuff. I think it was broken at the heel. There's some overspray, and I can see a line of fracture here that also moves down into the side, which suggests maybe the block was broken, or maybe someone at some point tried to remove the neck and this happened during that procedure. When that was glued up, I think some of the alignment went with it, and the neck is kind of pitched forward such that you can't really adjust the action on it. It could use a neck reset, but that presents, well, kind of a host of scary possibilities, because I don't know what went into putting this thing back together. Could be a bunch of screws or dowels in there. If we're not careful, an expensive job could become extremely expensive. And once you get into it, there's no going back, right? You take the neck off, it's got to go back on somehow. Otherwise you end up with a guitar that was previously playing poorly, turning it into something that doesn't play at all, which is never really a good thing. A lot is going to depend on the measurements and seeing if we can make it work, because the action is pretty darn stiff. Yeah, we're slightly over 8/64ths on the bass side, and somewhere around 6 on the treble. The bridge is bottomed out and then some. Someone took this fluted trumpet-like bass that you see on this side here off of the treble and replaced it with another adjustment screw to gain an extra, 32nd of an inch or so. So yeah, I mean, we talked briefly about maybe changing this out for a standard archtop floating bridge and putting on a different tailpiece, but no. And it's too low even to put a standard ABR style Gibson bridge on it. And I don't like the idea anyway, because this is fully hollow. It doesn't have a central block to support it. I could maybe install something, but even then, no. This is a first year of production. It's in really good shape, and clunky though it might be, this is part of the history I kind of want to preserve. Picking this thing up and hoping for a miracle, like maybe the neck was exhibiting a lot of forward bow that could be pulled out with a truss rod. No such luck. It's dead straight. It's actually great. It's just about 4 to 5 thousandths at the 6th fret. So not going to be able to straighten that any more than it is. When I mentioned previous work, the treble side of the neck here shows us some things. There are a whole bunch of little cracks along the line of the fingerboard and some rather prominent places where it had snapped, which leads me to suspect that, this has actually been removed and re-glued, and I can feel a slight discrepancy. It's shifted slightly towards the treble side by a couple thousandths of an inch. It's palpable. There's also a little bit of what seems to be a shim under the extension here. It's not functioning great because there's a tremendous amount of fall off for the neck extension portion here. It's slumped. This thing does need a refret, and we were hoping that maybe a taller fret might actually gain back some of that action, but it's not going to do enough. These things average about 25 to 30 thousandths, which is low. It does need a refret, but even if I put in good tall wire, we're only going to reduce it by about a 64th, which isn't enough to make it worthwhile to just do that. So I'm going to talk to the owner and get his go-ahead, because as it sits, I don't think I can make this work without doing the neck reset, scary as that is. I'm hoping that the removal of the fingerboard was to facilitate an older kind of technique where you could gain access to the dovetail under here, the space in front of it, and just dribble in hot or boiling water. It doesn't always work, and if you try to remove the neck by hand, sometimes you end up cracking the heel, which may have been part of what's gone on here. So hopefully this thing will behave like a normal guitar neck and come away without causing too much complaint. We'll pull off the pick guard, which has a screw at the waist and is held to the side of the neck with a pin. Another clue or information to take note of: most of these dot inlays on the board seem to be in exactly the place they were when they left the factory. They all have a similar color, and they have scratch marks that go along the board like this, with the exception of this one here, which seems to have come up at some point. It's rotated slightly. It seems to have been glued back down. Except for this guy here, number 15, the one that's just past the body joint. That's lighter in color, it's whiter, it's missing a fragment on one side, and it seems to have been sanded to a much higher grit than these guys. It has definitely come out. Also, fret number 14 here at the body is slightly wider in terms of it's been dressed down, which is not uncommon. There's often a hump here where they meet the body, and sometimes these get dressed. But looking at 15, on frets 14 and 15, you can see this little series of hatch marks right beside the fret at regular intervals. Those are from the barbs on the tang damaging the wood beside the fret slot as it's being removed. So these have definitely come out before. I'll take out the 15th fret again to gain access to the slot, where I can drill the hole for my foam cutters, which I'll use to remove the neck. Before I unscrew this pickup, let's note this slight ghosting on the lacquer around it, as if there was a larger sized dog ear at some point. More likely a pickup riser. So I'll take out the screws carefully, because they're going into a very soft kind of top. I'm not sure if that's an original cover, but that certainly is an original P90 from the 50s. I'm going to want to wrap that up carefully, because I'm going to need the space where it's located to sit my neck removal jig. So I'll just prop that inside. My jig is adjustable to accommodate different body depths. This is probably as thin a guitar as it will ever be used on. I had to make some little modifications to my neck removal jig here to account for the arch in the top and the back. I added some extra spacers here to raise the platform high enough that it's not touching the soundboard. You know, if you're confronted with the need to clamp a guitar body, you want to make sure the force is applied near the sides. The sides are only a couple of millimeters thick, but they connect the back and the front, and they're stiff. If you clamp in the middle of the body, odds are that you'll deform things enough that even if you don't crack it, which is a possibility, you'll probably pop the braces loose, which would be annoying. So this surface doesn't contact the top. All the clamping pressure moves through these padded discs, and the support blocks up front here are also padded and positioned near the edge of the body. Most arch tops have what I'd call a landing or a flat area where the recurve starts, so that's a good place to put something like a caul. Okay, turn those on. I've snugged up the tension screw at the bottom here. Okay, 10 minutes in, and the heel is starting to separate along the line of its former break, which kind of suspected it might. But there is a small gap opening up. Okay, you're going to get ready to do the third heat. Basically, all of the previous repairs have opened up. Everything that was broken in the past is back to that point now. The side cracks, the heel, the top is lifting from the block a little bit here, the binding behind the heel, and I'm not certain, but I think the block itself might have had a vertical crack running through it on the base side. This is one of the joys of fixing something that was previously fixed. It'll all go back together eventually, but it's annoying right now because I know there's going to be a bunch of touch-up before I'm done. I don't want to leave the foam cutters on for more than about 15 minutes at a time because I fear I might burn them out. That's way more than I usually need to get the neck off a flat top with no complications. A neck that's never been reset before. This one's got complications. So, you know, the heel seems to be mostly disengaged at this point, but there are some sticking points. It's like it's come loose on the treble side, and it's remaining stuck on the base in areas where the heel had previously broken through. So what I've done is I've shifted the entire body slightly so that I'm going to be applying more pressure on the base side this time. It really is stuck. The neck is loose all the way to the top here. It should just be popping out. I can feel the heel breaking. Yeah, it's breaking away at the bottom end. Maybe that's what it has to do. Okay. Yeah, this is nuts. Wow. Okay. Hey, this appears to be epoxy. This is not yellow woodworking glue, nor is it hide glue. Not ideal for this, guys. Yeah, all kinds of funny stuff in here. I'm going to want to save that piece. The thing about using epoxy for structural repairs is you better get it right the first time. There's no going back, and this is just, what a mess. I was wondering and wondering why this side would lift up, but this one wouldn't. And I recognize now that the side cracks that run through here, when those open up, the side is actually protruding out past the edge of the binding slightly and locking that previously broken crack in place so that if I push up on this side, there is a ledge here which this is being restrained by. So that's the reason. Now I've got to plow through all of this epoxy / wood dust and see if I can get this far enough out that I can remove the heel without too much more damage. I think I'm probably going to end up making this into some kind of floating mortise and tenon because this is really pooched. Or I suppose I could pull it out that way. Yeah, I think the dovetail was broken so badly during that initial removal that there was not much left, and they basically cast it in place with epoxy. I'm not going to try and save this portion of the block here on the neck side. I'm just going to route it all away and insert new material in the body. So this is going away. Here's another real mystery. This one is bizarre. Looking at this piece that came off the heel, this was two different pieces of wood at one point. This is not one block that fractured. How do I know? These two surfaces should be book matched, and they're not. They're actually quite different. But the thing I do not understand is this piece here on the bottom. This is continuous. That part that was being blocked by the side, it wasn't a small blockage. This whole section here is one piece of wood. It's not a dovetail. It's quite a bit farther across. There are score marks where I was cutting away the junk at the bottom of the dovetail in the body, but this is all one piece of wood that was inset from this direction. I don't know how that happens. Is this a repair piece that was grafted on? How would that work? You know, you can't push the dovetail down into the pocket and insert this afterwards like a key. I suppose you could if you were gifted, but I can't see that kind of perfectionist allowing that neck angle to happen with, you know, is this from the factory? That would mean they fit the dovetail with the back off, then glued this in place, paired it flush, and then glued the back on. Nuh-uh. Ain't nobody got time for that. I did a reset on a 1962 ES 125T, which is very similar, and it was nothing like this. Standard dovetail came out lickety-split. That one was actually loose, so I didn't even have to steam it off. Mystery. So I'm going to glue this thing back on as best I can. This is going to get pared away. This is going to get pared away. I'm going to cut a nice big mortise in here and one on the body, and this has turned into a lot of woodworking. This is the way it was sitting in the body. This portion is wider than the dovetail, so there is no way of removing this gracefully without popping off this section of the neck. I'll scrape and sand the old glue. For alignment and maintaining position, I decided to sink a screw into the area that will be cut away. Got a bunch of glue in there. Clamped it too for good measure. The piece of string woven through the tuners here is to prevent these grommets. Most of these guitars from the 50s and 60s, the grommets are pretty loose, and if you're not careful, they'll end up on the floor or lost forever. So you got to wrap it with a rubber band or put a string through it or something to keep them in place. Making the jig for the mortise, I decided to make it adjustable with two shims which I glued in place with tape, so the body mortise can be oversized to help me fine-tune the location. Here I'm drilling thin holes to help me get glue into the cracks in the neck block. The glue has been slightly thinned for good penetration. Get that all clamped up. Here I'm routing out a big piece of the neck block. That took away most of the damage. Here you can see just how much was holding that jig in place. There's no kickback or excessive pressure allowed when you're routing it. I'm going to route the neck mortise with those shims in place on the jig. This jig is more involved to make sure the center line aligns with that of the neck. I'm trying to keep things straight. I can only route so deep before getting too close to the truss rod anchor. I want to make the corners of the neck block mortise square rather than leaving the radius from the router bit, so I'll pare that down. I cut a block of mahogany. I made another block for the tenon. In this case, I need to round the corners. I got that glued in place, just cleaning up some squeeze out here. I'll pare down the excess. To mechanically lock the tenon in place, I'll use a couple of dowels. I'm resizing some maple in my swage block. I'll drill some holes. They bisect the glue line, as you can see, half in the tenon, half in the neck. This surface is going to be sanded, but I do want them flush. I'll pare away the excess on the neck block, trying to keep things flat and perpendicular. Now I can remove the veneer spacers to route the body mortise. Here I'm applying some tape, and you can see there's an additional little piece of wood on the back end there to just try and keep things level. And again, a gentle touch is necessary. To cut the channel square, I can guide my chisel on the side of the jig. Helps to register it. And I go back and forth from one side to the other, paring away a little at a time. Now I can add back some shims to perfect the fit and get the side of the neck to line up with the edge of the cutaway. It would be almost impossible to do this without spacers. Changing the angle is just like on a flat top guitar. By pulling the sandpaper through the joint, more material is removed from the heel end of things, tipping the neck back. Some sanding is necessary to get the break line nice and smooth and the curve consistent, and also prepare it for lacquer. After filling the pores, I start with a flash coat that is mostly thinner, which helps the old lacquer accept the new. Then it's on to color coats, which are a mix of virtually every brown in my collection. They're all in there. Umber, Van Dyke, Sienna. Just hit it with everything. I'll let this dry for a bit and then put on several coats of clear. After the color coats, this heel has had about 3 coats of clear lacquer on it. It will probably take more before I'm done. I want to get this thing together to make sure that there's no exposed wood, or I will likely end up damaging the finish slightly when I clamp it because this is so fresh. So there's going to be additional coats, but I think that's good to start with. To make sure the neck is in alignment, I'll reinstall the pickup so I can check how the strings match up with the pole piece screws. I do this by stretching a length of dental floss between the nut and the bridge. I'll have to see what it does under string tension, of course, but with the new neck angle, I might actually want to add, or maybe even reintroduce, a riser underneath the P90 there, because there is a bit more of a gap than I would expect. Although it's amazing what they got away with, especially on things like the Les Paul Juniors and stuff. For what is pretty close to an unadjustable pickup, it's amazing how forgiving the P90 can be. It's glue up time. I put a band clamp on for good measure. Well then, I had to take the neck back off. When I took off the clamps and tentatively strung it up, it was a little bit overset. In other words, the bridge was going to need to be too high off the body. And in a case like that, there's really nothing to do but say, oh, fiddlesticks, and do it over. This is one of the not so great things about a straight mortise and tenon versus a dovetail or a bolt-on. The self-locking nature of the dovetail lets you string a guitar up before gluing, so you can get a better picture of what will happen. Tiny little changes at the body joint can make big differences at the bridge. In this case, it was, more than I was willing to accept. One nice thing is that it gave me the opportunity to test and reinforce to me that the straight tenon took exactly the same amount of heat and pulling to let go that I usually need for a dovetail. Maybe even a little bit more. The neck came off just fine, very neatly. I didn't film it. I was going to run out of file storage space, and you've already seen how this works and time, I just pared away a little bit off the heel angle. Now I get to glue it up again. It happens. To add a layer of insurance, I'm going to reinstall the strap button, or actually replace it. I had a real vintage Gibson one kicking around here. And to do that, I have this super extra long number 6 sheet metal screw. These are not easy to find. This happens to be 3 inches long, which is good for certain cheapo kung fu resets, but it's not something you're going to find in your big box hardware aisle. You'd have to order it. Also in Canada, everything like this would normally come with a Robertson tapered square drive head, which it just doesn't look right on guitars, so I ordered a Phillips. This one is a little bit too long. I'm going to lop it off, just so it doesn't come through the front of the neck block, which you would never see in this guitar anyway, but On pilot holes like this, for necks, you don't want to go undersized. This the same diameter as the inner core of the screw here, minus the threads. And I'm actually going to drill a larger diameter hole in that portion of the neck here before it reaches the neck block. See, this hole is the same diameter as the outside of the threads, so it slips in unto the point where the tip of the screw is meeting the inside surface of the neck block there, past the mortise. So this is the safest way I know of keeping your neck intact. There's a little crack here which is usually hidden by the pick guard, but we might as well get some glue in there. This might just be in the top layer of veneer.
Heat them up, pull them out, cut them in. Rawhide.
I don't think this nut is original. It's been in there for a long time, but it doesn't have the look of the nylon that they were using in the mid-50s. And looking down there on the back edge, I see a lot of glue. So this might be a fun adventure. Well, that was easy.
I'm using some black drawing ink to hide some of that damage.
These are not easy to find. This happens to be 3 inches long, which is good for certain cheapo kung fu resets, but it's not something you're going to find in your big box hardware aisle. You'd have to order it. Also, in Canada, everything like this would normally come with a Robertson tapered square drive head, which it just doesn't look right on guitars, so I ordered a Phillips. This one is a little bit too long. I'm going to lop it off just so it doesn't come through the front of the neck block, which you would never see in this guitar anyway, but you know. As I'm going to dress some of that hump and fall away out of the board, I have to make sure there's a little bit of tension on the truss rod.
I'll start the leveling with my sanding level. This is just to knock off all the high spots and get rid of some of the more gnarly hills and valleys. You can see the kind of wear that's on this board. And I'll use a radius block to true it up and make it more uniform. Because of the leveling, the slot depths are now kind of irregular, so I'll true those up with a scratch. That was getting arduous, and there was some glue in some of the slots, so I pulled out my Dremel with the 1.2mm bit and deepened things a little. Fretting proceeded with my usual technique. Hammer in the ends. Give it a squeeze. Clean off the little bit of fish glue which I use in the slot.
Okay, I'm in the process of making a nut, but I'm going to call the video here. There is a complication that needs to be addressed. With strings on, I've got decent, actually really good action on the treble side, but the angle of the neck in relation to the body has changed. The neck is not bowing, it's good and straight, and the heel is still locked tight against the body, but projecting a line from the top of the frets, the height above the soundboard at the bridge has lost like a 1/16 of an inch since stringing up. The top is hinging somewhere around the front edge of the pickup here, or back edge, depending on your perspective. So the highest point in the arch is back here. It's dipping. Looking on the inside of the guitar, there's actually a rather large rectangular block of maple that's glued in the area of the bridge. It happens to be flamed maple, seems like it's more than an inch thick. Not entirely sure if that's original, but it sits between the two longitudinal braces that are relatively light in cross-section. They're tight. Everything I could reach was well glued, but it is folding up, and it's sinking more on the bass side than the treble, leaving us with precisely the condition we started with. The bridge is bottomed out on the bass side. Of course, now it's comfortable to play. Got an action just over 5/64 on the bass, less than 4 on the treble. But I don't feel good leaving it like that. The plywood, you know, it's close to 70 years old. It might need a hand at this point. I'll make an addendum to this video for next week and we'll check back in. I'm thinking about using some posts like you'd find that support the sound well in a National resonator guitar, just to maybe bump up those braces in this area and see if we can keep that bridge tall. The pickup height is okay. It's better than some I've seen. Just a hair over 1/8 of an inch from the strings. And the screws are extended about as much as I'd want to see. A spacer of about 1/32 of an inch might help. But let's plug it in and see what it sounds like. And then I'm going to go get some sleep because this has been a very, very long night.